Hello and welcome to Run It Back on the Raptors Republic Network. I'm your host, Zulfi, joined by Kyle Ramnarine as always, and we are back to recap another week of Raptors action. And I know what you're thinking. It hasn't been a week. It's been 2 weeks. Well, because of the in-season tournament knockout stage happening, the schedule was a little weird for the Raptors. 3 games the week before, 2 games this week. We thought it was a little light to split them up, so we decided to put the content together and have more to talk about. So I know it's a little unusual, but we will have all Raptors action covered. And also, shout out to the Lakers for winning the in-season tournament, the first one ever. LeBron gets another ring. I don't know. Talk about it. But with that being said, let's run it back. Now we go to the schedule recap. It's what we do every time. And through the past 2 weeks, the Raptors played 5 games, 3 at home and 2 on the road. And as you can see from the graphic, a lot of L's, unfortunately, for this team. We won't spend too much time on each game going through all 5, but we'll have all the key information like always. Now to start things off, Toronto began this stretch by visiting Brooklyn for their final in-season tournament game, and that feels like forever ago. Now despite being eliminated from the IST at that point already, the Raptors had an opportunity to play spoiler with a convincing win, and spoiler alert, that didn't happen. Spencer Dinwiddie and Mikal Bridges each dropped over 20 points, and Toronto had 6 players score over 10, led by Pascal and Scotty who had 17 apiece, but they still lost. The Raptors kept it close for most of the night and even tied it with 94 with just under 5 minutes, but their defense couldn't hold it together down the stretch. 39 points surrendered to the Nets in the fourth quarter. Raptors lose 115-103 and finish the IST group stages at 1-3. Better luck next time. Now to Toronto's only win in their last 5 games, and it came against KD, Devin Booker, and the Phoenix Suns. Arguably Toronto's most impressive win of the season, considering Durant had won the last 7 games against the Raptors he's played, and the Suns were on a 7-game win streak. Toronto played some remarkable defense on Phoenix's star duo. KD did drop 30 points, but he needed 30 shots to do so and going 11 of 30 doing it, while Booker was held to a season-low 8 points. On the other side, Scotty did what he seems to be making a mini habit out of and took over in the fourth quarter, scoring 12 of his 23 in the final frame. Toronto wins 112-105, and when asked about his heroics post-game, Scotty had a pretty simple answer.
I don't know, I got that dog in me. I get real energized. Just found a rhythm today. And just had it going.
Toronto handed KD his first loss in Toronto since November of 2018. And oh yeah, Drake was there, and he tried his best to give a post-game speech, and it was as insightful as you would have imagined.
Come on, big dog.
What's up, Coach?
What you got for us?
Oh, what do I have?
Yeah, man, you're part of the team.
By the way, incredible win. You see, look at my dog has a chain on. Saw a lot of synergy, a lot of sharing the ball, a lot of great plays made. Congratulations, boys. It's a regular season win, but it's a great win nonetheless. It is what it is. We gotta celebrate.
We had season record of 44 deflections today, and Scotty had 10 deflections. He wants to get it to win that sweet.
On 3, 1, 2, 3, together!
Coming off arguably their most impressive win to date, the Raptors hosted the Knicks, trying to make it back-to-back dubs, and this was a classic tale of 2 halves. Tied at 57 after 2, the Knicks went on a 14-4 run in the third and never looked back. The sticking point in this one was the Raptors' lack of firepower and inability to keep up with the Knicks' shooting. New York hit 16 threes, outscoring the Raptors by 30 from deep. It was Dante DiVincenzo who went bananas from downtown, knocking down 7 threes and scoring 21 points off the bench. And speaking of bench, the Knicks bench doubled the Raptors, 50 points to 25. The lone bright spot was Scotty, who stuffed the stat sheet. He had 29 points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists, 5 steals, and a block as the Raptors lost 119-106. Then came the Miami Heat, who rolled into town. It's always nice to have Kyle Lowry back in the city. Unfortunately, that didn't go so well for the Raptors. It was a close game in the first half, with Toronto even up 66-64 at the break. Unfortunately, the Raptors left their offense in the first half. Toronto only managed 37 points in the third and fourth quarters combined. Now, if that weren't bad enough, they couldn't hold Miami's star small forward back. No, not Jimmy Butler. Caleb Martin, of course. Martin dropped 24 points to go with 12 rebounds and a double-double performance. Now, Pascal did drop a 30-piece, even going 11-11 from the free throw line. We know we don't see that every day, but the Heat hand Toronto a 121-103 L. And now we go to our final game of this recap. If the Suns win was the most impressive for this Toronto team, this might have been the most disappointing loss. The Raptors took on a Charlotte team that many considered bottom barrel and were without their lone star LaMelo Ball. And Toronto found themselves down by as many as 20 points to that same Hornets team. Talk about down bad. Really, what can you even say at this point? Charlotte had 4 different players score over 20 points. That's right, not 10, 20 points. It tied a franchise record for the Hornets, and a reminder, that's without LaMelo Ball. The Hornets took a 90-77 lead into the fourth, where the Raptors finally showed some signs of life, and it was their bench, not their starters, that opened the frame on an 11-2 run that made this a real ball game. Precious Achiuwa drilled a 3 midway through the quarter to give Toronto their first lead in what seemed like forever, but a flurry of threes from Charlotte gave them back their lead and worried Coach Rajakovic enough that he had to put his starters back in. Now, the starting unit did keep it close, with Barnes, who had a triple-double of 30 points, by the way, even having a chance to tie the game in the final seconds with some free throws. He did miss the first, and then after a couple Rozier free throws, Scottie would eventually miss the game-tying attempt at the buzzer. Now, if that didn't suck enough, the Raptors also lost Otto Porter to a left foot injury in this one. Toronto lose their third game in a row, 105-102, but hey, Scottie Barnes at least looked awesome. That's something, I guess, right? 31 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists. The youngest Raptor with a 30-point triple-double and his second of the year. He even went on a personal 10-2 run at one point in this game, so Scottie at least got some development points out of this. Now, a lot of action and unfortunately a lot of L's for Toronto. The Raps finished the 2-week span with a 1-4 record and now sit at 9-13 and hold the 11th spot in the East. Kyle, I don't know what to say. What do you even have to say for this Toronto team right now?
Bro, there's too many people out there running around, getting cardio, doing absolutely nothing on defense. You look at this Hornets team, it looked like Siakam and Scottie were the only ones that wanted to win this game. Because I'm looking at Gary Trent Jr., 20 minutes, 0 points. Missed all his shots. Precious is sometimes out there running. Malachi Flynn is not putting up great numbers. He's looking like he's gone down in production. Dennis Schroeder's having poor performance after poor performance. You know, I don't know about you, but do you think it's time to move some of these bench players and try to flip it into other pieces? Because we keep coming back to this conversation, but something's got to happen. Something's got to give.
I think the last thing you said is what it comes down to. Something's got to give. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we don't know what the right answer is because they're just going to have to take a risk with something. Is it trying to flip some of these like bench pieces to add different type of depth? Because currently the way it's going, it doesn't make sense. Because like moving the bench pieces is the Raptors finally admitting the biggest thing. The roster construction doesn't make sense. They don't have the requisite shooting. They don't have the requisite spacing. So they need to do something. Either that's moving some of these pieces around on the bench and trading them out to kind of flip them into other more productive players. But how likely is that? Because if they're playing so poorly, where's their trade value at? Now, the more realistic thing is probably just rejigging this roster currently. And the first person you're going to have to look at is probably Dennis Schroeder. He's a point guard and he's important. And I came into the season saying Schroeder needs to start because this team needs a point guard. I didn't think it made sense to have Scottie being that playmaking guard forward type mix because he just hasn't shown that offensive creation ability for others. You're seeing it a bit from him now, but I didn't know if that was reliable. But it's gone to the point where the Raptors' legitimate only successful offense comes through Scottie and Pascal through the post. They don't really find a lot of consistent offense otherwise. So having Schroeder in that starting lineup, kind of taking away the space and not being a shooting threat doesn't really help much. And I want to say it's simple as put him on the bench, let him lead the bench unit, bring Gary Trent Jr. into a starting lineup. But we've seen Gary throughout this stretch too. He's obviously dealt with injuries as well. But like if he's I guess he's a threat, so you still want to keep him out there, but he hasn't really been hitting his shots. So I don't know how much of a difference that makes. This team is just in such a rut and they need some kind of a shakeup. That's evident. You can't keep it the same. That's the answer. What you do is up for debate. But at the end of the day, something needs to be done. I think we can all agree on.
It's like at this point, like if you're giving the team incentives to win by offering them a pizza party, you know you're in some sort of rut out here because like it's just we can try to move around the lineups, change the lineups, whatever. But at the end of the day, if the players themselves aren't performing, like Malachi Flynn, he's giving you 2 to 3 points. Dennis Schroeder, he's not hitting his shots. You know, Gary Trent Jr. is struggling. Chris Boucher is struggling. Precious, you don't know if he's going for 20 and 10 one game or he's going to give you 6 and 6 one game. You know, so it's hard to form lineups when we don't get any sort of consistency. So I'm looking at Masai and I'm like, what are we trying to do? Are we going to move around for different types of players? I read a report recently that Indiana is looking for like a big two-way. Like a forward, I think they're looking for specifically. So, you know, Siakam kind of fits what they're looking for. I don't know if they can make some moves. I don't know. Not saying trade Siakam, but there's got to be some teams out there that will take on these pieces and give us back something decent. I don't know what they would want to work on, what the trades would look like exactly, but right now we have to address the shooting. We have to address that. Why are Scottie and Siakam the only ones that want to score at some points? And we need other people to help this offense flow.
look, Masai's calling card coming into this, like his tenure with the Raptors, was that he doesn't want to be stagnant. He doesn't want to be stuck in mediocrity. And he made big moves to do it. Like, we'll talk about it a bit later on too, but he's made moves repeatedly when this team is kind of hitting that, like, what's next, like, I guess, benchmark. And we're at it. We're at that point where it's like, what's next? Where's this team going? What's happening? And it's like, I don't know what's going on with Masai, but if I was in front of him, I'd want to just shake him and be like, come on, wake up. Let's do something. Yeah. Like, I'm not saying blow this roster up. I'm not saying tank. And I don't think a lot of people are. But we're saying that this current construction doesn't work. So something needs to come from it. And I think this stretch of 5 games tells you that more than anything, because you can win a game against Phoenix, but then you can lose a game against Charlotte. Yeah. What the hell does that even mean? Like, how up and down is this team that you can see such high highs and such low lows? The whole problem is there isn't any consistency. The high highs and the low lows don't matter, because at the end of the day, you're just going to end up being a 500 team if you can't pick on one of those things. You know what I mean? So they just need to find some consistency, and it's just not going to happen with the current roster.
You know, it's just it comes down to, like, I don't even want to say we should tank, because I feel like our team, we can build a young core that looks promising for the future. Because why tank that far if we already have someone like Scotty Barnes? You know, that is the key piece of this team. So just build around Scotty. I don't know that's what I'm saying. What is so difficult about picking a direction, saying this is the guy, he is our future, let's get some pieces around him, let's build up the chemistry, you know, let's form a team going in the long run, something like OKC did, and look how it worked out for them. You know, why are the Raptors so opposed to moving players? I don't know what is going, like, again, Siakam and Scotty, 7-year age difference. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, so, like, I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not in Masai Ujiri in this front office's brain. But if I have to hazard some kind of a guess, I think it has to do with ownership of building this roster and this team. We look back at Masai when he first came to this Raptors team from Denver, like, his fingerprints weren't all over this team to begin with. Like, he decided to keep Dwayne Casey along, and Dwayne has even talked about that. He thought he was going to be gone because most front offices are going to bring in a coach that they want, but he decided that Dwayne Casey made sense and he was going to stay. But outside of that, Masai made a ton of moves. He was willing to trade Kyle Lowry at one point. He traded away Rudy Gay. You know what I mean? Like, so he wanted this roster to have his fingerprints and his stamp on it. And that's a lot different than where he's at now, because the outcomes and the results that they've kind of had to deal with are because of decisions that Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster have made. They traded for Jakob Poeltl. They let Ben Vliet walk away. Obviously, the Kawhi Leonard situation, that the really good parts of it, obviously winning a championship, but that free agency, and then you saw Siakam blossom. That was a Masai Ujiri move. You know what I mean? So, like, when you have so much ownership of some of these outcomes and some of these decisions, it's probably harder to, like, admit you were wrong or admit that they're not working. So if I had to hazard a guess why they're so adamant on keeping things going, it's because they believe that they made the right decisions, or they trust their gut, which is, I guess, important. You want to have that instinct, but also sometimes you have to admit when you're wrong. That's just as important. Sometimes you have to admit what I tried hasn't worked, so we're going to have to go in a different direction. And hopefully Masai and Bobby Webster can do that, because, like, no one's saying they're bad. I still think they're one of the best GM front office groups in the league. But it comes to a point where you're at kind of like a crossroads, and you have to admit, I've been going left this entire time, but now left isn't working. So it's time we try right.
I think, like, worst case scenarios, they just don't make any trades at the deadline. They hit the free agency and they don't either re-sign OG and Siakam. If they lose one of those guys for nothing, I think it might be like the ultimate failure for this front office, losing either OG or Siakam if they were to walk, because they're both on contract years. So OG, and I think, did we extended Gary Trent, or is he still up for things?
He's up for free agency.
Yeah, so I don't know what they need to do. Like, all I know is something has got to give. They have to not even just be like, hey, we were wrong about whatever. Just be like, hey, let's try some tweaks. Let's try to get some new players on this team, some fresh blood, see if it works with Siakam and Scotty, see if we can get something going, you know? Because, like, we have a big enough sample size now to be like, this is not working.
Yeah, but the funny part is, like, I totally agree with you. But to give Masai and Bobby some, like, slack, that's easier said than done when this team isn't playing well. Like, who's going to want to trade for these guys? You know what I mean? So, like, they're in such a tough spot. Like, the easy person to trade is obviously Pascal or OG. But you probably want to try to keep really talented players around as a front office because you want to win. So, if they wanted to then keep those guys around and try to trade some of these bench guys, well, who's going to want them? Who's going to want Gary Trent Jr. on right now when he's a rental and you know he's not playing well? Like, some of these other guys who are on the bench, like Chris Boucher is, like, pretty old. He's, like, I think over 30. Who's going to want a over 30 stretch forward who can sometimes be really good and sometimes not? Precious Achiuwa is going to be a restricted free agent. Like, what? There is some upside there, obviously, as we all know it, but, like, that's not somebody you bank on currently. So they are in a really tough spot. So I don't really know what to make of it. But at the end of the day, the funniest part of all of this is if the Raptors can go win like 10 of 12 games, people are going to look at this team so different. That's the annoying part. Like, there's so much about rosters and construction that are so valuable and so important to see, and you can just see the construction of this doesn't make sense. But hell, it's sports. If this team's winning, it solves so many of these problems. The only issue is right now, they just don't look like they're going to be able to do that. They just don't look like they're going to be able to have a 10 out of 12 stretch where they win a bunch of games and rattle off a bunch of W's. So because of that, you're like, okay, well, you have to evaluate this team how it is right now. And right now, it just doesn't look like this team can keep it together.
Exactly. Right now, they just have to address the major shooting issues, and if they were to go on the win the next 10 games, like, people are gonna get happy. But for me, I'm just like, when it comes postseason time, they're not gonna win the finals. So we're celebrating like winning these games, but it's like in the long run, like, it's just bittersweet because we're not contending. Like, I want to be in a place where we know we're building towards something or we're contending.
Yeah, that's fair. Again, it comes back to direction.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm getting really sick of that word because that's all we can use to describe the situation. It's what is the direction of this team? And part of it that bugs me too is it makes it sound like everyone's lost faith in like this front office, and everyone wants to point fingers and be like, these guys don't have it. When that's just not true. Like, less than 5 years ago, this team was celebrating a championship because of this front office. So I don't necessarily think they've lost it. I just think they're too, like, they have blinders on these decisions they've made that they're passionate about, rightfully so. They've worked out for the most part. Because again, if you're passionate about wanting to keep Pascal Siakam, do I necessarily blame you? He's an all NBA forward that you developed in this team, and you guys made him who he is today. So I get that. But like we said to start this segment, nothing is kind of leading to anything right now. I don't even know if that sentence makes sense, but they're just not leading towards anything, and some kind of shakeup needs to happen. And Masai Ujiri has been willing to make shakeups before. He has been willing to look at a team and been like, this just doesn't cut it. And we know he can be cutthroat when he needs to be. So I'm really hoping he looks at the situation the same way objectively. He's like, this just ain't cutting it. I have to do something. So hopefully we're kind of gearing towards that. Again, I'm not saying it has to be a trade. I'm not saying it has to be a specific like change up in the roster. Just something needs to happen. That's not what this current team is.
Yeah, exactly. And I know it's interesting too, because on the Raptors show they interviewed Yuta, and he was like, I wanted to stay on the team no matter what. He even told them, send me to the 905. So why wouldn't we want a guy like that's young, that can provide, wants to be on the team, but instead we're going for guys like Malachi Flynn and things like that. Like, no disrespect to them, but it's like Yuta could have again grown alongside someone like Scotty, like OG.
Yeah, it would have fit perfectly with Scotty.
I'm telling you, young team, can shoot, can play defense, has the hustle, the energy, but instead we're just like, it's like we're almost blind some ways. We're too connected to certain players, and I don't know. That as soon as I heard that, I started rubbing my face. Bro, I was like, we really could have kept this guy, bro. Like,
but yeah, that goes back to ownership, right? Like, this team, this front office drafted Malachi Flynn. They saw him in the mold of a Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet, a shorter guard who can really work well in pick and rolls. At least that's what he was touted to be. And that is something they banked on. They decided they had a winning formula because we saw what Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet were. So they thought they could try it again. And it didn't pan out this time. But that's one of those things where, like, when you have ownership, you have, like, I don't want to say you're defensive about it, but you have this sense of responsibility to it. So you want to believe in it. But sometimes you kind of have to see that it didn't work. Third times isn't the charm. We have to make a decision on this. We have to move in a different direction. I think most people can agree with that. It's hard, but as a front office, you kind of have to see it that way. And hopefully they can see it that way moving forward. So far, it hasn't really happened in the last couple seasons, but we know what this team is capable of. We know what this front office is capable of. So I want to put a silver lining on it because I don't want to lose faith in everything just yet. But I'll say that as to add, if it continues this way, then we're going to be having a different conversation. Yeah. It's not going to have a silver lining to it. It's not going to be so positive. There's going to be a lot harder, a lot more pressure coming at this team at that point. But I think that wraps it up for this because I don't want to be going in this circle. Like we said, we're just going to be going in this whole direction conversation forever if we keep it up. Toronto wins a bunch of games. Everything looks a lot brighter. If they don't, then it's going to be like, all right, time to do some stuff. But that pretty much wraps it up for the recap. We're going to move on to our next segment. And now we move on to the weekly stats leaders for the Raptors. After another stretch of hoops, here are your Raptors statistical leaders. Not much has changed. Scotty and Pascal remain atop the scoring ladder for Toronto. And after a couple of big outings for Barnes, he inched up closer to a return to being over 20 points a night. Schroeder's assist total did take a bit of a dip. He's below 7 a night now and just outside the top 10, sitting at the 11th spot in terms of assist leaders. and your rebounding leaders stay the same. Now, I know we can probably have a conversation out of this about Scotty, Pascal, and who's kind of at the top now, but I think that makes more sense for power rankings. So we're just going to move on to our next segment. And with that, Kyle, take away our power rankings.
All right, I got you guys for this week and last week's power rankings. This is what we're going to be taking in. So just quickly to run it through, we got number 1, Scotty Barnes, 2, Pascal Siakam, 3, OG Anunoby, 4, Dennis Schroeder, 5, Jakob Poeltl, 6, Precious Achiuwa, 7, Gary Trent Jr., 8, Chris Boucher, 9, Malachi Flynn, 10, Jalen McDaniels, 11, Grady Dick, 12, Otto Porter Jr., 13, Garrett Temple, 14, Christian Koloko, 15, Thad Young. I don't know if you have any thoughts before we dive into this, Zulfi. What do you think? A lot of movement this week, a lot of movement.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see so many players move up and down, but I guess when a team wins 1 out of their last 5 games, that's going to happen. Players are going to move up and down, probably more down than up, to be honest. But I think the biggest one, obviously, is the Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam. Pascal was at the top of this power rankings for quite a bit, I think, since we started this, to be honest.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see Scotty at the top, but I think you nailed it, obviously, because Scotty Barnes has kind of been taking over in some of these games. The annoying part is they haven't been in wins, so the contingent of fans who are kind of like, what's the point of Scotty having these numbers if they're losing? Well, he's a young player, he's developing, and when you put up a 30-point triple-double, I think you deserve to be at the top of the power rankings. Pascal did have a 30-point game as well, so there's no knock on him for that. They're both really, really good players. Just seeing Scotty Barnes take over the way he has these past couple of weeks, I think is just more, not impressive, but more important to what this team is, because obviously taking over in the fourth quarter, 12 of the 23 points he had against the Suns, I think he had in the fourth quarter. He had like a 10-2 run of his own against the Hornets, even though it was an embarrassing loss, quite honestly. He was still super impressive. So I think you nailed it at the top there. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about why Scotty over Pascal. I'm pretty sure I covered most of it, but let me know what you think.
For me, it was honestly that 30-point triple-double. And he's been performing consistently too. He's had, again, him and Siakam were literally neck and neck because they were playing really well, especially with that Hornets game too. But honestly, that triple-double really impressed me. It does show Scotty's future capabilities. I don't factor the wins too much into the power rankings because, again, we're pretty much always losing at this point. But
yeah,
it's Scotty Barnes really impressed me with that, and his shooting. That he's not afraid to take the 3. I can just see him progressively getting better and better. So this week, and considering last week too, he did have some really good performances. So I just had to put him at that number 1 spot. I think he did enough to earn it this week.
Yeah, fair enough. I think I agree with you. I think you nailed on that one. I'm used to just roasting your picks, so I'm glad we started with one with me agreeing with you.
With some bright spots.
Next one I want to talk about, and I don't really think I disagree with you. If I did, I think he should probably be a bit lower. I'm curious. Dennis Schroeder, he just went down 1 spot from 3 to 4. And again, I don't think he's a bad player. I just think it's been a really rough week or so for him because just the way he's fit on this team. His knock has been he's a really good playmaker, but there's just times where he just sucks the life out of a possession. He kind of over dribbles. Sometimes he gets hard. It was so bad that I believe after it was the Heat game, he apologized to the rest of the Raptors because of his performance. So it's been a tough week or a tough stretch for Dennis Schroeder. I'll say that. Roster changes aside and all that going on in terms of should he start, should he come off the bench. I just think he just didn't have the best weeks. I'm curious why down just 1 spot and maybe not more.
See, I was definitely struggling with this idea of moving Dennis down too because he's had some solid games, but then he's had some really bad games. So I had to move him down, but then it's do I move him below Jakob and then move OG up, or do I move Jakob below? And because those 3, OG, Dennis Schroeder, and Jakob were hard for me to kind of juggle with too because Jakob, he had some nice games, but he had some really trash games as well. But then with OG, he had 23 against the Heat, but then we're seeing him have 8 against certain teams, 11 against certain teams. So it's how can I find the balance too, So I feel Dennis, he didn't have enough good performances to move down 1, but I still think he did play a little bit better too from Jakob, especially with his shooting, helping the offense flow a bit more. But if anything too, I've been really wrestling with this idea too, and if he continues like this, he's going to continue dropping too. If Precious can stay a bit more consistent, I can easily see Precious move up higher than Dennis, which is crazy to say. If he's given up 17 and 10,
if Precious could be more consistent, he would be a god on this team.
Maybe
this guy would be an all NBA defender if Precious could be more consistent.
This guy, so I could see Precious taking over Jakob and Dennis. It just, we got to see more consistency from him too. And again, if Dennis keeps up with these poor performances, he's going to drop more. He's going to drop more and more. I could see Jakob again moving up to 4. So it's just those 3 I was kind of wrestling with. So again, I'm not gonna knock it too. Like, I agree with you too that he could have been lower. It's just, with me, it's like taking in the other players' performances as well and like figuring out where they're supposed to go.
Yeah, again, I don't think any of us are hoping that Dennis drops more. I think we'd like him to stay towards the top because that means he's playing well. But it's just one of those things where you hope he comes out of this slump. He hasn't really shown like prolonged performances of this where he hasn't been looking good. So I don't think I'm too worried about it. But it's interesting. Like you said, it's kind of hard to rank players when all of them have one good performance and a couple mediocre performances. How do you rank them in a power ranking? I find that really funny. I am curious to know from you, this is kind of a bit of an aside. Dennis Schroeder and Jakob Poeltl, two obviously so far staples of this starting lineup, but two of the players that caused some of the most spacing issues for this starting lineup. Because obviously Pascal, OG, and Scotty, you want starting. They're the core right now, at least for the foreseeable future until if a move happens.
Yeah.
So out of those two, Dennis and Jakob, which one would you be more inclined to want to send to the bench? Obviously, Dennis is a guy who is a point guard and a floor general, so having him with this kind of mediocre bench unit would be helpful. But then a guy like Precious might benefit from working with the starters. I think Louis Zatzman has posted a couple of pieces on the idea of like having Precious play with these guys can make him meet his potential a bit more, but we obviously know the drawbacks of that. And then also Jakob is a guy you pay $20 million a year to and you just re-signed. Do you want that guy coming off your bench? Is that really worth it for that investment? So I'm curious, out of those two, like, what do you see there?
Because I'm thinking too, like, you have a guy like Dennis, like you said, that can play make, that can help run that second offense too. But if you were to bring someone to replace Jakob, like a Precious or a Boucher or something, then that can open up more spacing options for the team on, like, if they were to do a pick and pop or something like that. But then our defense might take a hit too, especially if they're not playing up to par too. Because I've seen Precious and Boucher, some of their energy just lacks at certain points too, and that Dennis and Jakob pick and roll has been like their bread and butter this entire season. You know, it's been flowing. So if I had to pick one, I'd honestly just say Dennis Schroeder, just because I think that second unit needs a leader sometimes too. They're out there looking lost. Like, you need people that can be like, okay, this is what you gotta do, this is what plays we're gonna run. Again, he has this shooting. When he's on, he's on. So I feel like Dennis would be more important than Jakob too, especially with our starting lineup. We need that defense, we need the pick and rolls too. As like, it's hard too, because that spacing is crazy, bro. That spacing with Siakam and Jakob, it hurts. Like, if we had the one or the two like reliable shooters, then it wouldn't be as bad, right? So you can go either way, but for me, I'd say Dennis.
Yeah, and I think you brought up an interesting point too, that Dennis and Jakob have been a really good pick and roll duo tandem, and they've been building that chemistry together. And that's raised some people to ask the question, like, hey, do we send both of them to the bench? It would be a very interesting prospect to have Gary Trent Jr. and Seiya Precious Achiuwa in the starting lineup. Ironically, two players who seem to thrive a lot more playing with starters, but it's like, do you really trust them enough to be able to do that on a consistent basis? We don't know yet, but hey, if you're not going to make, say, a trade, that might be something worth considering. Do you bring bets like Dennis and Jakob off the bench? It would definitely bring a lot more reliability to the bench unit, but it's also a very drastic move, asking two veteran players that you brought in with like not super long-term commitments, but contract commitments, and then ask them to then go be bench players. It's a lot to ask, but it might be worth considering with this Raptors team. So maybe it's not one or the other, maybe it's both. So I think that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. And the next player I'm going to ask you about, I just think you're going to have a lot to say about this. So I'll let you sound off. Talk to me about Gary Trent Jr.
Bro, he's lucky he's not 15 right now. After that performance, after that performance against Charlotte, he's generally lucky he's not 15. 0 points in 20 minutes, bro. What are you doing out there besides getting cardio, bro?
It's a Tony Snell special, man.
He's just out there running, man. Like, so you are the 3-and-D shooter of the team. 0 points. There's no threes in that. I don't know what you're doing out there. I don't know if we need to get him more involved in the offense. I don't know if he needs to go do that D-Lo meme where he's taking shots after the game. Like, I need him to do something, bro, because this is just not acceptable, bro. He's lucky he didn't go in the bottom 10. I swear to God, I was so mad. I was about to put him below Otto Porter Jr., bro. I was so upset because you are a starter on this team. Your standards are higher than the bench players. You are held to a significantly higher standard, and you're on a free. This is your last year on this contract, bro. You're trying to play for a contract. You can't be playing like garbage out here. And I'm like, I need to see at least. I'm not saying asking for 20, 25 a night. 15 points, 1 or 2 threes here and there, some solid stops. That's all we're asking from you. But you're contributing nothing to the team. This is a Hornets team without LaMelo Ball. You need to be able to be at least contribute to the offense a little bit. And then some other games, I'm watching you score 8 points, score 7 points. You're missing some free throws. You're missing some threes. It doesn't look like it's all there. The energy isn't there, especially with the Hornets game too. Aside from Scottie and Siakam, it looked like the entire team just didn't want to play. So I don't know if he should get moved to the bench. I don't know if, like, because right now,
like, you're saying you would considering benching him, like, entirely?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I think he could be a solid 6-man because it's better than getting 0 points in general too. You know, I really hope that Grady Dick can take a leap, not like a superstar all-star leap, but if he can just shoot better, and because I know his defense is there, he could just be like a cheaper Gary Trent at this point. If he can just get that shot going, what I know he can do, what I've seen him able to do, it would be a cheaper Gary Trent, and he's a younger Gary Trent at this point. His defense is there, his shot is there, his passing ability is better. It just
is his shot there? I think that's the one thing that's not there.
His shot needs to get there. His shot needs to get there if he wants to take that spot from Gary Trent, but his passing is better than Gary Trent. So listen, I can see Gary Trent moving down, but I just need Grady Dick to like remember how to shoot. Just remember how to shoot.
And then he's trying in the 905. Grady Dick has been putting in work, but very similar to Gary Trent and the rest of this Raptors unit. Just can't put it together for consistent stretches. He had one of his best games in the 905, like 2 games ago against the Long Island Nets, or 3 games ago now, I guess. And he had 23 points, efficient shooting. But then today against the main Celtics, he barely got a shot off. He was a little quiet. I think he had 15, but it's just one of those things where other players on his team are getting more shots than him, and that's just not what you expect out of Grady Dick when he's down there. So he's very similar to this team that, like, he needs to figure it out, and Gary Trent Jr. is that guy where he needs to figure it out as well. The thing for me is, it's like there seems to be a lack of engagement and activity, and I'm not putting it down to effort, because obviously he's out there, he's trying. He, like you said, he's in a contract year, so it really bodes well for him to try. So I'm going to assume he is at least doing that part of it. But he was like tops in the league for big chunks of the season last year in deflections. That defensive intensity doesn't seem like it's there. His offense, obviously, his production isn't there. And like, he'll give 15 against the Heat, but then 0 against Charlotte. Like, a bit of that is obviously your shot isn't falling, but like, it's one of those things where, like, take grasp of the opportunity. There's no one else on this bench that's consistently producing. We don't really have a 6-man right now that we can rely upon. A lot of people probably saw Gary Trent coming into a contract year thinking he was going to be in contention for 6-man of the year. He was going to be basically given free reign of this bench unit for a team that people thought had decent expectations, and he was going to be able to get as many shots as he wanted. And for the most part, he has. Yes, he's dealt with a bit of an injury, but the opportunity is there. I just really don't see like what's holding him back other than maybe his injury being a bigger factor than we think. But if that's not the case, Gary, you have all the opportunity. This bench is begging for someone to be a reliable 6-man, and you can be that person very quickly. If your career is going to come down to you have to play with starters all the time to be productive, I don't know how reliable that is, and I don't know how viable that is for an entire long-term career. Show that you can do this with a bench unit. Show that you can be a spark plug 6-man. If you were traded for Norman Powell, have the same trajectory as Norman Powell. That'll have you giving you a long career in the NBA. And I'm not saying he's going to be out of the league anytime soon. I just think he has the capabilities. He has the skill set to manage in this league. He just has to show it on a more consistent basis, especially in a year like this year when you're on a contract year. Remember coming off in this offseason when this Dame trade that supposedly was on the table didn't happen and Gary Trent Jr. was still here. They decided there's this, like, Chris Haynes reported this contract extension that was apparently really close to getting done that just never happened. Like, it's a very weird situation for Gary Trent Jr. And he's kind of playing for the next big deal of his career now that apparently didn't come in this offseason. So I need to see something from him, and I think this front office does as well. But like right now, it's just not there, and I really would like to know what the case is. If it's an injury, I'm not saying he has to tell people, but like it would really help his case if he told people if it's because of the injury.
Just tell people if it's plantar fasciitis. I don't know if it's a confidence thing. I don't know if it's like if he's just there's something mentally that's like my shot's not falling, you know. Even like I remember Grady Dick when we asked him about it in the 905, he said sometimes it does bother him a little bit, you know, like when your shots consistently aren't falling. So I don't know if that's moving with Gary Trent Jr., but it's like you're coming off a 15-point performance in Miami. So do you just what happened from then to Miami, or was it in the game itself that he's like none of these shots are hitting, you know, like, and then that affects his defensive effort, you know? So I'm not saying send him to the bench as kind of like a negative thing or demotion thing. I feel like that might take might take more of the pressure off him to perform, you know? So when he's with the bench, he's a little bit more relaxed. The shot will come to him, the game will come to him. I don't know exactly. I feel like he might play a little bit better off the bench. I feel like that might do him well in the long term just to get his feet back under him. Because right now, too, if he keeps playing like this, they're going to look at him to trade him when it comes to deadline.
So wait, just to be clear, so you're saying you want Gary to play with the bench players more?
Yeah.
Because right now, because he is coming off the bench already. Like, he's
Yeah.
already a bench player. You want him to play with the bench guys more or less with the starters.
Yeah, I think, like, honestly, too, I think keep him as that 6-man. Like, keep him as that 6-man and just kind of alleviate, kind of just, like, not put as much pressure as too, because anytime we see him, sometimes they might try to insert him with the starting guys or run different types of lineups. It just doesn't look like it's not clicking out there for him. But I've seen times where he takes the offense into his own hands. He'll go for the step back threes, he'll go for the mid range, and I know he has the ability to create his own shot off the dribble. I've seen it with my own eyes before. So I just need that confidence back in him. Or it's like, if this keeps up, I don't know what they're going to do with him going forward too, because it's better. They might try to move him because it's better than getting nothing out of him.
Yeah, but that's totally agreeable. But again, what are you going to get for Gary Trent Jr. right now? You know what I mean? Like, it's such a tough spot for this team in this front office, and this team just needs to bank on these guys figuring it out, because until they do, everyone's going to be asking for these people to be moved. But how is the front office going to move them if they have no value? So the only way that any of this gets solved is these guys have to play marginally better for people to be interested in them. So is that going to happen? I don't know, but I think that is kind of the conundrum this team, this roster is in. That's what this power rankings in. Like we said, these guys have a couple good performances and a couple bad performances all in 1 week. How do you rank that?
Yeah,
I don't know. We tried, but I'm curious to know what people think. I think that pretty much does it for like what thoughts and questions I had on the power rankings, but I want to know what other people have to think, because this team is so polarizing. There's a lot of players on this team that a lot of fans, I think, are going to be completely supportive of still. Like, I'm sure there's a huge contingent of people that have belief in Precious Achiuwa because of the talent he has to offer, even with the lack of consistency. But there's also probably a couple of players who are like, hell no, Precious Achiuwa, get it together. You're a restricted free agent. We expect more from you. We traded Kyle Lowry to get you. So you gotta have to show something for that. So I'm curious to see what fans think. So let us know in the comments below. Sound off. Tell us if you agree, disagree. As always, if you're gonna roast us, please at us. I want to engage with people. I'm sure Kyle does too.
Just add me on Twitter, like.
Yeah, bro. No, you don't need to substitute us. Let us hear it. We're going to have some fun with it as well. But that pretty much wraps it for the power rankings. We're going to move on to our next segment. All right, and now we move on to This Week in Raptors History. Like I always say, it's one of my favorite segments because we look back and we reminisce in Raptors history, see some of the fun performances, some of the fun moments, and sometimes we like to truly reminisce, and that's exactly what this week is going to be. This week in Raptors history, we look back at one of the biggest trades in franchise history. That's right, that is the Rudy Gay trade, and it's because this is the 10-year anniversary. On December 9, 2013, the Raptors and Kings agreed on a 7-player deal. The Raptors sent Rudy Gay, Quincy Acey, and Aaron Gray to the Kings for Grievous Vasquez, John Salmons, Patrick Patterson, and Chuck, don't Google his free throw form Hayes. After Gay was traded to the Raptors the year prior, this was going to be the team's chance to really take off after the core of Lowry, Gay, and DeRozan had an offseason together to kind of get things working. Instead, they got off to a 6-12 start, and Masai decided it was time for a shakeup. Now, many thought the trade meant the end for the DeRozan and Lowry era in Toronto, and the team was set to tank for promising young Canadian stud prospect Andrew Wiggins. So much so that Lowry had his bags packed thinking he was going to be traded to the Knicks. Instead, the pieces they got back turned out to be valuable role players and allowed the duo of Lowry and DeRozan to thrive and grow into a true tandem. The Raptors went 42-22 after the deal, won a franchise-best 48 games at the time, and made a playoffs after a 6-year gap. Toronto took on Brooklyn in the playoffs last year, and of course we all remember Masai's iconic pregame speech outside Scotiabank Arena. And although the Raps ended up losing that series in 7 games, it sparked belief into the core of Lowry and DeRozan and that this team had something to build around. They had a bit of a direction. We all know the story, how it went after that, and if that wasn't enough to make the Rudy Gay trade a wild story, how about the subsequent moves that trail off from it? Players like OG Anunoby, Norman Powell, Serge Ibaka, Terrence Ross, Gary Trent Jr., and others all have connections to this Rudy Gay trade in some way. You should look it up. Blake Murphy had a whole chart on it. Go to his Twitter and take a look at it. It is very interesting. Now, you don't have to draw parallels between that situation, trade, and the outcome from it to this current Raptors team, but it's hard not to see some of the similarities. I can understand why some fans are looking at the anniversary of this trade and asking Masai, take a trip down memory lane, think about this, and see if he can pull off a similar move to revitalize this current core. Either way, let us know what you think. Anything you remember from the Rudy Gay trade? And do you think Masai should pull off a move like this again, or believe in the guys he has now? Sound off in the comments, but that does it for this week in Raptors history. Let's move on.
All right, now let's look at the week ahead with betting ahead. So this week, before last week, actually, I told you guys to take the money line on the Nets and the Knicks. This was before we had our difficulties, but how did that go? Well, it turns out Raptors lost to both teams and sold me on that. So I didn't have any for you guys on the money lines, and they ended up defeating Phoenix. So I lost 2 times. So hopefully this week on the money line, I can come back. We can get some W's. So what's coming up this week? The Raptors have the Knicks, and they've versed the Hawks twice for this week. So this week, I'm predicting something crazy, but I think they'll beat the Hawks back to back. I think they will end up losing to the Knicks, though. But for me, I just feel like deep down, they're going to take the Hawks both games. I feel like they're coming off a losing streak right here. They need to get some dubs. So I think with the Hawks and the Knicks too, for me, it's weird. I don't know. They're all up and down. If Julius Randle decides to turn into Wilt Chamberlain, I feel like the Raptors won't have a chance. But with the Hawks, I think they'll get the dub. But so going on to our Raptors 10K 10-week challenge. Last week or the week before, I said the Suns would be a great game to bet on. And the legs I told you to do was Scotty for 15 plus points, Siakam for 20 plus. So that was the normal parlay. And other legs I told you to do is Dennis for over 1.5 threes, Scotty for over 1.5 threes, Siakam for 6 plus rebounds, and Scotty for 6 plus rebounds. What are the results? What did they say? We did win the second week of the challenge if you did the normal parlay, the first 2 legs for the points. The only things that didn't hit would be the threes with Dennis and Scotty. Otherwise, the rebounds did hit as well. So going on to the next week, we should have $40 to bet with now. And when you bet that $40, you'll probably win another 40 and then going 80 to the next week. So this week, I got to go with betting against the Knicks. While I did say they might lose this game, I think the Knicks brings out the best in these teams. So they usually give the Raptors a good fight, meaning our starters will have to score. So here's what I'll go with. Scotty for 15 plus points, Siakam for 15 plus points, and I'll do Dennis for 10 plus points. I know Dennis has been up and down, but I feel like because of these poor performances, he has a chip on his shoulder. He wants to prove that he can get back on up there with these guys, so he'll go for at least 10. And other legs to consider, Scotty for over 1.5 threes, and both Siakam and Scotty for 6 plus rebounds. So hopefully we can continue to get the W's, keep climbing this ladder, and get to 10 by the end of these 10 weeks. And now we'll wrap up the show.
All right, thank you, Kyle. Now that does it for us. We want to thank everyone who followed along, and hopefully you're caught up on all things Raptors. If you like this and want more content from us and the rest of Raptors Republic, check out this description or go to raptorsrepublic.com. Better yet, sign up for a subscription. You can get some exclusive content from the rest of the Raptors Republic team, like the usuals like Samson, R. Lewis, and everybody else that has amazing things to offer. Please like, share, subscribe, the usual stuff, and always, most importantly, leave a comment. Let us know what you think. We always want your feedback. Again, we've only just started this. We want to keep growing. Hopefully you enjoy it and you let us know what you think. But for Zulfi Sheikh and Kyle Ramnarine, that does it. We'll see you next week where we run it back again.